They saw a janitor. She laughed at him. But when the world's most powerful CEO faced a crisis no one could solve, it was the man with the mop who spoke 9 languages and changed everything. This is the story of Harrison Cole, a war hero in silence, a single father in shadows, and the man who taught a billionaire the language of the heart. If stories of quiet strength and second chances speak to you, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful tales that stay with you long after the credits roll. Now, let's begin. The fluorescent lights inside the Los Angeles International Immigration Center buzzed like a swarm of mechanical bees. Fluorescent, cold, and merciless, just like the atmosphere that lingered within the walls. Families clutched paperwork, faces drained of hope. Cries echoed. A toddler's whimper merged with a translator's strained Spanish. The air was thick with the scent of sweat, desperation, and hierarchy. At the far end of the room, a man pushed a mop across the tile floor. His name was Harrison Cole, early 50s, hair streaked with silver, posture weathered by years of labor and war. He wore a faded military green shirt beneath a janitor's apron. His boots were old, but polished. He walked with a slight limp, earned, not inherited. He moved without drawing attention. And yet, when he paused, the silence around him deepened. Across the hall, the glass doors whooshed open. A flurry of assistants, security guards, and digital devices announced the arrival of Clarice Montalban. The Clarice Montalban, Fortune magazine's most powerful female CEO in the Western Hemisphere. Her hair was pulled into a flawless chignon, her sunglasses more expensive than most people's rent. She walked in like a queen, inspecting her borders, stilettos striking the tile like gavels. Her crisp red suit looked like it had never touched a human wrinkle. Behind her, 2 aides struggled to keep pace, one wheeling her $15,000 Rimowa trunk. She wasn't supposed to be here. Not in this terminal. Not with them. Clarice didn't hide her disgust. "What is this chaos?" her assistant stammered. "It's an immigration bottleneck, ma'am. They're processing a high-risk case involving a factory manager on your team." "I don't need problems," she snapped. "I need clearance. I'm late for a $400 million summit." One of the officers gestured. "We're short on translators. We're doing the best we can." Clarice's eyes flicked toward the janitor mopping quietly in the corner. "Is that who you're relying on for linguistics?" The officer hesitated. Clarice's lip curled. Then she turned to the room, her voice slicing through the air like broken glass. "Let the cleaning guy mop the floor, not solve immigration laws." Heads turned. The room fell into an uneasy silence. Harrison straightened slowly. He didn't flinch, didn't smirk, didn't even put down the mop. He just looked up, eyes calm, ancient like old oak, and said in a voice so steady it cut deeper than any retort, "I speak 9 languages, ma'am." A pause. Then Clarice laughed. Not a polite laugh. Not one to brush past awkwardness. No, this laugh was full of disdain, the kind that said, "People like you don't surprise people like me." "Do you?" she sneered, arms crossed. "Which ones? Bathroom Spanish and Google Translate?" Her assistant chuckled awkwardly. Harrison didn't blink. "I'd be happy to assist," he said softly. "The gentleman from Guatemala doesn't understand the legal terms being used. His daughter is epileptic. He's afraid she'll be deported without her medication." Clarice rolled her eyes. "We have lawyers for that." "No, ma'am," Harrison replied. "You have contracts. He has no English, and she has 36 hours before her seizures restart." Silence again, the kind that forces you to choose between power and humanity. Clarice's eyes narrowed. "Fine. Show me." Harrison handed his mop to a fellow janitor. He walked calmly past her, toward the interview chamber, where a security guard raised an eyebrow. but the officer watching the screen nodded. "I've seen him do it," the officer muttered to the guard. "Mandarin, Russian, Farsi, Japanese, like flipping a switch." 15 minutes later, Clarice stood frozen behind the one-way glass. Harrison sat beside the man from Guatemala, speaking fluent, rapid Spanish. Not just words, but with emotion, context, and nuance. He explained the forms. He comforted the daughter. He translated legal terminology back and forth with such effortless flow that even the immigration officer stopped taking notes, just listening. Then came the twist. The French ambassador's assistant rushed in from the adjoining room, panicked, shouting about a miscommunication that could tank a trade deal. The official translator had gone missing. "Anyone speak French?" the supervisor called out. Clarice instinctively turned to Harrison. He was already standing, already speaking. Fluent, elegant, perfect. French to Arabic, Arabic to Russian, Russian to Portuguese. By the time 20 minutes had passed, Harrison had single-handedly resolved 3 cases, reunited 1 family, and salvaged a multi-million-dollar diplomatic debacle. Clarice didn't laugh again. When Harrison emerged, wiping his hands with the edge of his apron, she was waiting. No longer smug, not smiling. She studied him, this quiet man with gentle eyes and tired shoes. "What are you doing cleaning floors?" she asked, more curious than mocking. He tilted his head. "Sometimes people like me are easier to ignore when we blend into the background." She opened her mouth to speak again, but no words came. The room around them didn't applaud. But it didn't have to. Because in that moment, in the echo of her own laughter, Clarice Montalban finally saw the man who had just saved 3 lives and a piece of her empire. Without a title, without a suit, without saying more than necessary. And that's when the seed of change quietly planted itself in her. The quiet hum of the downtown bus hummed beneath the dim lights of early evening Los Angeles. Harrison Cole sat near the back, his frame slouched not from defeat, but from habit. His janitor's apron folded neatly in his lap, eyes half-lidded as the city rolled past. Concrete, neon, lives blurred in motion. He clutched a small paper bag. Inside was Lily's favorite, a blueberry muffin with exactly 3 chocolate chips on top. He'd learned to pick them by sight. She liked to pretend the chocolate chips were stars, and the muffin, the moon. Outside, the city's noise dimmed as he reached a modest apartment complex, wedged between a laundromat and a broken payphone booth. Faded red bricks, rusted railings. Home. He climbed the stairs with a practiced limp, his right knee stiff in the cold. At the door, marked 2B, he paused, not to catch his breath, but to listen. A giggle, a girl's voice, clear as spring water. He smiled. Inside, the apartment was small but immaculate. The walls bore maps of the world, dotted with pins, red for languages, blue for memories. A globe sat beside a battered dictionary, and handwritten notes lined the fridge like museum exhibits. At the center of it all sat Lily, 8 years old. Hair the color of sunlight filtered through honey. Eyes too big for her face, too bright for the room. She sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by papers. A pencil clutched in one hand, her tongue slightly poking out as she scribbled something onto a sheet. "I'm writing a letter to the president of Argentina," she announced without looking up. "Is that so?" Harrison's voice was gravel wrapped in velvet. He placed the bag on the table and walked over, squinting playfully at the page. "Spanish or Portuguese?" "Both," she said proudly. "Just in case they elect a bilingual one next time." He laughed softly and ruffled her hair. Smart thinking. She looked up, noticing the weariness in his shoulders. "Rough day?" Harrison hesitated. Images of Clarice's laughter, the man from Guatemala, and the sudden shift in the room flashed behind his eyes. Then he knelt beside her. Interesting day. Lily pushed the paper aside and pulled a small notebook toward her. Can we practice the Chinese radicals now? He nodded. Show me what you remember. She picked up a brush pen, dipped it in water, and began tracing characters on a reusable slate. Huo means fire, she said, her voice confident. Mu means wood. Together they make burning, Harrison said softly, but also warmth. She smiled. And Gia is home, right? He nodded, but his eyes drifted toward a picture frame resting on the nearby bookshelf. A photograph, slightly faded. A younger Harrison, back straight, eyes fierce, wearing military fatigues, a medal pinned to his chest, silver star. Behind him, a woman with laughing eyes and a baby in her arms. The woman was gone now. Cancer didn't care for medals. Dad, Lily said, bringing him back. Do you miss being a doctor? He blinked. Of all the languages he spoke, grief was the one he never quite translated well. Sometimes, he said carefully, but I don't miss the hospitals. I miss helping. You still help, Lily said, as if it were the simplest truth in the world. You help me every day. A beat of silence passed between them. Then, gently, Harrison stood and opened a drawer, pulling out a folded piece of paper. Your mother wrote this before you were born, he said, handing it to her. She said one day, you'd ask big questions. She wanted you to have her answer. Lily unfolded the letter slowly. Her lips moved as she read in silence, then aloud. Be kind. Not because the world always deserves it, but because you do. She looked up. She was really smart. She was, Harrison replied, his voice low. And so are you. Outside the window, a siren wailed faintly in the distance, swallowed quickly by the layers of city noise. But inside, the apartment remained still. Safe. Lily yawned and curled beside him on the couch. He covered her with a thin blanket and kissed her forehead. Then, as her breathing slowed into sleep, Harrison reached for a journal on the shelf. Leather-bound. Worn. Inside were pages of notes, not janitor schedules or shopping lists, but neural diagnostic patterns, multilingual child cognition studies, medical theories scribbled in shorthand only he could read. He flipped to a bookmarked section. Immune memory in pediatric post-stroke recovery. His fingers hovered over the ink. The world might see a mop in his hand. But his mind never stopped working. He could translate Russian legalese while solving rare blood disorders in his head. And no one, not even the CEO who laughed, had any idea who he really was. He closed the journal. Tomorrow would come with more floors, more languages, more judgment. But tonight, he was a father, a quiet man with a silent past, and a daughter who believed he was the smartest man alive. The 42nd floor of the Montalban Tower shimmered like a jewel box above downtown Los Angeles. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected a city in constant motion, but inside the glass-walled boardroom, time seemed to freeze under pressure. Clarice Montalban stood at the head of a long mahogany table, her silhouette sharp against the skyline. She wore a tailored white blazer and stilettos with gold-plated heels that clicked like metronomes of control. Her voice, cold and crisp, sliced through the murmurs of the room. This delay is unacceptable. We promised results by Q3, and now we're stalled over translations? A young woman from marketing, barely 30, shifted nervously in her chair. The refugee outreach program hit some communication blocks. Some of the families speak rare dialects. The on-site team says we're losing trust without proper translators. Clarice's eyes narrowed. Then hire professionals. We don't build empires waiting for villagers to speak our language. An older executive cleared his throat. We did hire them, but some aren't certified in certain languages. The legal department flagged it as a liability risk. From behind the boardroom glass wall, just outside the room, a quiet figure moved with a mop and a bucket. Harrison Cole. His head was down, methodically wiping a long streak of boot print across the polished marble tiles. His movements were fluid, silent, efficient, like a ghost. One junior project manager noticed him and leaned toward Clarice. "That janitor. He's the one from immigration. I heard he speaks multiple languages. 9, actually." Clarice didn't look. She took a sip from her crystal glass, water barely rippling. "I don't need a janitor's wisdom to save my business," she said, voice laced with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The words, though softly spoken, traveled through the glass like a knife. Harrison paused, but only for a breath. Then he lowered his gaze and continued mopping. The waxed floor gleamed behind him like a mirror that remembered everything. Inside, the meeting carried on. "What if we bring him in just to assess the dialect groupings?" someone offered. "He was a doctor overseas, wasn't he? Maybe he could identify medical context, cultural terms." Clarice raised her hand, silencing the room. "This is not a charity. This is Montalban Global. We don't take language lessons from janitors." Her heels turned as she dismissed the idea, walking toward the digital projector. A new slide appeared. Charts, budgets, deadlines. But outside, Harrison had stopped again. From his tool belt, he pulled a cloth and gently began cleaning the lower glass of the boardroom wall, the one the executives never saw because they never knelt down low enough. And for a brief moment, the people inside saw themselves in the glass. Suits, ties, Rolexes, high heels, and behind them, a man in worn boots. A man who didn't need their recognition to know his worth. He finished cleaning, stood, and moved on. But not far. He stood just outside the room's side door, out of sight, yet within earshot, because he had heard something that didn't sit right. One executive had asked a vital question before the conversation was crushed. What if the translation issue isn't just logistical? What if it's cultural? What if the families don't trust us because they don't feel understood? That wasn't a marketing issue. That was human. And Harrison, of all people, knew what it meant to not be understood. Clarice's voice rose again, breaking the moment. "This initiative is goodwill PR, not a babysitting job. Either we get the contract signed, or we pull out of the region entirely." Silence. Disappointment hung in the air like dust in light. Then, from the far end of the boardroom, a voice spoke up. Quiet, but firm. It was the young marketing woman again. Her name tag read Emma. "Ma'am, if I may, those families trust the local aid workers, but they don't trust our branded translators. They're scared. We need someone who speaks like them, not at them." Clarice didn't respond immediately. Her manicured fingers tapped twice on the table. "Are you suggesting we send janitorial staff to handle global negotiations?" Emma swallowed. "I'm suggesting we send someone who listens." The moment cracked like porcelain. Clarice's lips twitched. "You know what listening gets you in this world, Emma? Exhausted. Poor. Replaceable." She turned, heels clicking again toward the exit. And this time, she opened the boardroom door herself, only to find Harrison standing there, mop in hand, bucket beside him. They stared at each other for a beat. He didn't flinch, didn't lower his eyes, just gave her the same calm look he'd worn at the immigration center, the same look that, once, made a Guatemalan grandmother trust him with her truth. Clarice exhaled through her nose, the barest hint of annoyance. "Still following me around with your mop," Harrison replied, voice steady, quiet. "Still spilling the same mess." For the first time, Clarice blinked. Then, surprisingly, she smiled. But it wasn't warmth. It was war paint. "You're bold for someone with a name tag and a mop." And you're blind for someone with a boardroom and $1 billion. Another pause, a tense one. Then she stepped past him without another word. Behind her, the junior staff glanced at each other. Emma watched Harrison, eyes wide. And Harrison, he simply walked away, mop trailing behind him like a knight dragging his sword from a silent battlefield. The community center on Spring Street pulsed with quiet tension. Folding chairs creaked under the weight of unspoken fears, whispered dialects, and nervous anticipation. The room was a patchwork of faces from every corner of the world: Cambodia, Honduras, Eritrea, Ukraine, and Vietnam, stitched together not by borders, but by need. At the front of the hall, a microphone stood lonely on its stand, surrounded by a long folding table draped in a white cloth. Interpreters bustled behind it, flipping through clipboards, adjusting earpieces, wiping beads of sweat from their brows. Clarice Montalban sat near the back. She wore a neutral-toned blouse, less commanding than usual, and no entourage, no golden heels. Only her assistant, Emma, sat beside her, scribbling notes. Clarice had come to observe, to prove her decision to cut the multilingual outreach program was the right one. After all, how effective could a few words truly be? The program's organizer, a weary man in his 60s named Mr. Santiago, stepped up to the mic and tapped it. "Good afternoon, friends. Today, we open this space to listen. Not as executives, not as officials, but as neighbors." A round of gentle applause followed. Next, one by one, people from the audience rose to share their stories. Immigrants seeking health care for children, elders trying to navigate food stamps, mothers crying in courtrooms because they didn't understand the judge's words. And then, a frail Vietnamese woman stood. Her shoulders trembled beneath a wool shawl. Her hands shook as she held out a slip of paper. She said something in Vietnamese, fast, nervous, urgent. But the interpreter assigned to her froze. He stammered, unsure of the dialect. She said something about a hospital and granddaughter? The woman's face fell. Her voice grew louder, more desperate. She waved her hands, repeating herself. No one understood, until a soft voice cut through the air. "I can help." Heads turned. From the side aisle, a young girl stepped forward. She was small, no more than 8, but she walked with a calmness far beyond her years. Her hair was pulled back in a loose braid, and her notebook was clutched to her chest like a shield of confidence. Clarice narrowed her eyes. The girl approached the front and gently asked the woman, in perfect Vietnamese, "Chào cô the gyup, ba jang noi ve chào gai bi ben, phải không?" The woman gasped and nodded. Tears welled instantly. Lily turned to the room and translated without notes, her voice clear and steady. "Her granddaughter is sick. They were denied Medicaid because the paperwork was wrong." She tried to explain, but no one at the clinic spoke her language. "The girl hasn't eaten in 2 days." Silence. Pure. Heavy. Clarice felt something shift in her chest. Lily paused, then added, quietly, "She's not asking for charity. She just wants to be heard." The room erupted in soft applause, not polite clapping. Moved clapping. The kind that comes from people who understand what it feels like to finally be seen. The old woman reached for Lily's hand and kissed it. Then a voice in the crowd whispered, too loud to ignore, "Is she that janitor's daughter?" Clarice stiffened. Lily simply smiled and nodded. "Yes, my name is Lily Cole. My dad is Harrison. He's cleaning the halls today." There was no shame in her voice, only pride. Clarice turned toward the exit, but not to leave. She was searching. Through the small window in the door at the back of the hall, she spotted him. Harrison, sitting on a folding chair outside, his mop beside him, listening. not entering, not interrupting, just being present. Clarice stared at him through the glass. He didn't smile, didn't wave. He only met her gaze with that same quiet strength she couldn't quite categorize. Back inside, the mic squeaked. Lily was answering questions now, translating Mandarin, then Russian, then Spanish with seamless grace. One interpreter stepped aside, watching her with awe. Even Emma looked stunned. She's fluent in all of them? Clarice's voice was quieter now. She's fluent in what matters? Emma turned, confused. What do you mean? Clarice didn't answer, but her fingers had stopped writing notes, and for the first time in a long while, she just listened. After the session, people gathered around Lily, some offering snacks, others simply thanking her. One child handed her a drawing. Another whispered in Arabic, and Lily responded with a laugh and a thumbs up. From the hallway, Harrison finally entered. He knelt beside his daughter, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. "You did good, kiddo," he murmured. "I know," Lily said, proud but humble. "She understood me, Dad, all the way through." He smiled. Not big, just enough. Clarice lingered nearby, arms crossed. She hadn't planned to speak, but somehow she found herself walking toward them. Lily noticed her first. Clarice cleared her throat. That was exceptional. Lily tilted her head. Why? Clarice blinked. Excuse me. Why is it exceptional? Lily asked. To speak someone's language? To care? It wasn't rude. It was honest. Clarice opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked at Harrison. You taught her that? No, Harrison said simply. She taught me. They stood there in silence for a moment, three people from entirely different worlds, bound by something invisible and ancient. Understanding. Finally, Clarice extended a hand to Lily. I'm Clarice. I run the company your dad works for. Lily shook it. Then you should know. He's more than a janitor. Clarice didn't reply. But this time, she didn't laugh. Iraq, 2003, Kandahar province. The desert was a furnace. Even the shadows shimmered in the heat, rippling over broken stone and crumbling clay walls. Sand clung to sweat-drenched uniforms and burned against exposed skin like invisible fire. Sergeant Harrison Cole crouched behind the shell of an abandoned truck, his ear pressed to a radio that spat static and Pashto in equal measure. Move out! One soldier hissed behind him. Harrison held up a hand, eyes narrowing. Across the ravaged street, women in bright headscarves herded children toward a crumbling mosque. Gunfire had died down minutes ago, but something was wrong. Too quiet. No birds. No wind. Just the hiss of the radio and the metallic tick of fear. Then it came. Pashto. Fast. Sharp. From a boy, barely 10, yelling from a rooftop, waving his arms frantically. Harrison's eyes widened. IEDs, he whispered. They laid traps on the escape route. He turned instantly, voice like steel. Tell the convoy to reroute now. North alley, through the market stalls. Are you sure? The lieutenant barked. I understood every word. There was no time to argue. Harrison leapt over the barricade, waving his arms. Back! Back! This way! Yalla! Yalla! The civilians obeyed without question. Mothers clutched their children. Elderly men leaned on canes. A baby screamed. And then, boom! The street behind them erupted in a column of flame and dust. The blast shook the earth. Shrapnel whizzed like hornets. Harrison was thrown backward, his left leg catching a shard of rebar. He hit the ground hard, ears ringing, vision swimming. But as smoke rose and rubble settled, the people were safe. He looked up through dust-filled lashes to see the same Pashtun boy standing over him. You speak our tongue, the boy whispered. Harrison gave a bloody grin. I speak 9 of them. Then darkness took him. Present day, Los Angeles. The apartment was dark. Only the streetlight leaking through the blinds painted slashes of pale gold across the walls. Harrison sat alone at the kitchen table, one hand curled around a chipped mug of tea that had long since gone cold. In front of him, a small velvet box. Faded. Frayed. He opened it slowly, as if afraid of waking ghosts. Inside lay a dull silver medal, its surface tarnished, the ribbon torn. A combat action ribbon. He hadn't taken it out in years. His fingers brushed over the engraved edge, like one might trace a scar. Footsteps padded softly. Lily. She stood in the doorway in her pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Dad? He turned slightly, the shadows softening his face. Couldn't sleep. She moved toward him, small and light, and climbed onto his lap like she used to when she was 4. Her hand found the medal. Is that yours? He nodded. From the war? Yeah. She studied it with quiet reverence. Did you save people? Harrison exhaled, a sound between a sigh and a laugh. I tried. Lily leaned her head against his shoulder. Do they know? He glanced at her. Who? The people at your job. That you were brave? He shook his head. I don't need them to. Silence settled over them like a blanket. But Lily, being Lily, always dug deeper. Do you ever miss it? He looked out the window for a long time. I miss the purpose, not the pain. She nodded, then said softly, I'm proud of you. His throat tightened. He kissed the top of her head. You're my purpose now, baby girl. The clock ticked on. Outside, the world moved. Cars passed. Distant sirens echoed. But inside that small kitchen, it was just them. A father. A daughter. A legacy neither asked for, but both carried with strength. Harrison gently closed the box and slid it into the drawer. The past didn't define him, but it reminded him who he was, and why, even now, mopping corporate marble floors, he refused to bow his head. He stood slowly, leg aching from old wounds that still whispered in his bones. Lily watched him. You okay? He smiled. Always. She took his hand. Come on, she said. Let's go to bed. You've got work tomorrow. As they walked down the hallway, Lily glanced back at the table where the medal had been. Dad? Yeah? You may not wear a uniform anymore, but you're still my hero. He didn't respond, but his eyes glistened in the dark. The wind had picked up that afternoon, chasing golden leaves down the stone path outside the community center. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a pale hum over the after-school language program. Children from every continent sat in folding chairs, flipping flashcards, swapping stories in broken English, Spanish, Tagalog, Amharic, Vietnamese. The room breathed in dozens of accents. It was alive. Clarice Montalban stood awkwardly at the back of the room, her tailored coat too stiff for the folding chair beneath her. She looked like a porcelain sculpture, misplaced among finger-painted posters and laughter. Her eyes, though, sharp, calculating, were scanning, always scanning. She hadn't intended to stay. It was supposed to be a drop-in visit, a photo op for her company's multilingual outreach campaign. But something had kept her feet rooted. Maybe the quiet confidence of that janitor's daughter, or maybe a curiosity she wouldn't admit even to herself. Lily Cole was seated cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by younger kids who listened intently as she guided them through pronunciation drills in Spanish and Mandarin. Clarice's assistant leaned toward her, whispering, "Should I prep the car?" But Clarice didn't respond. Her gaze was fixed. Then Lily stood, brushing imaginary dust from her jeans, and walked toward the front with a folded piece of paper clutched in both hands. "Excuse me," the girl said, voice steady and bright. I found something." The room stilled. She unfolded the paper slowly. Aged, yellowed, creased so many times it looked like it might crumble. She turned toward Clarice. "My mom wrote this before she died. She tried to send it to your office." "I don't think anyone ever read it." Clarice stiffened. "What is it?" Lily held it out. "It's a letter. She wrote it in Old Spanish." Clarice hesitated, then took the paper, her polished nails trembling just slightly. Her eyes scanned the words, ink faded, but passionate. Then her brow furrowed. She blinked once, twice. I can't read this dialect," she admitted quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. "It's archaic. Andalusian, maybe?" A silence fell. Not judgmental, just human. Then another voice broke through. "I can," Harrison said. He had stepped in without sound, holding a mop still dripping with lemon-scented water. He didn't offer explanation. He simply approached, eyes on the letter like it was something sacred. Clarice looked up, uncertain, but something in his expression silenced any protest. He took the letter and began reading. His voice was low, steady, each word soaked in reverence. "To the woman who decides the fate of others from behind glass walls, I beg of you not as a client, nor as a stranger, but as a mother. My daughter is bright. She has gifts I do not understand. She dreams in languages I cannot speak. We do not ask for charity. We ask for a chance. Please, see us." By the time he finished, the room was frozen. Clarice looked down at her own hands. She had built skyscrapers, dictated global trade deals, dissolved million-dollar contracts with a nod. But now, she couldn't even hold eye contact with a janitor. Or his child. "Why didn't we receive this?" she asked, barely above a whisper. "I think you did," Harrison said, folding the letter carefully. "But someone decided it wasn't important." Clarice exhaled, shaky. 1,000 thoughts tumbled behind her eyes. How many voices had she missed? How many pleas had been buried under red tape and filtered through interns who never understood the stakes? She looked at Lily. The child was quiet, not accusing, just present, just real. "Your mother," Clarice began, voice uneven. She was very brave. Lily tilted her head. She was kind. People thought that meant weak. But she wasn't. Clarice swallowed. "May I keep the letter?" Lily looked to her father. Harrison gave a subtle nod. "Yes," Lily said. "Just don't forget what it says." Clarice stood there, holding a mother's last prayer, as if it weighed more than her entire empire. Later that night, Harrison stood at the kitchen sink, washing dishes while Lily did her homework at the table. The apartment smelled faintly of lavender and garlic. Home. "She didn't expect that," Lily said suddenly. "Who?" "Ms. Montalban." "No," Harrison replied, scrubbing a plate. "She didn't. She looked different after. Not mean, just cracked." He dried his hands, turned, and leaned against the counter. "Sometimes," he said, "a crack is the first sign that something's trying to let the light in." Lily smiled, then turned back to her notebook, switching fluidly from French to Japanese between lines. And Harrison watched her in quiet awe. The world hadn't made space for them. So they carved it, word by word, act by act, truth by truth. One translation at a time. The lobby of the Los Angeles Global Outreach Center was buzzing. A Friday afternoon rush of volunteers, caseworkers, and immigrant families waiting for answers. Multicolored banners hung from the ceiling. Voices beyond borders. Language is humanity. Somewhere in the background, a child's laughter rang out before being drowned by a burst of frantic conversation. Clarice Montalban stood stiffly near the front desk, scrolling through emails with the speed of someone trying not to listen. She wore a gray power suit, tailored, crisp, but the lines around her eyes looked softer than usual. Beside her, her assistant Mia tugged lightly at her sleeve. "Clarice, the intake officer needs your sign-off on the Venezuela file." But a commotion broke out near the visa consultation desk. 3 families, one from Morocco, one from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and one from Syria, were speaking urgently, their voices tangled in translation. A young volunteer stammered helplessly in broken English, while a caseworker fumbled with her Google Translate app, frustration mounting. I think the documents are wrong," the volunteer guessed, panic in her eyes. "They say their visas got denied, but it's not making sense." The tension in the room spiked. A baby began crying. A man in a taquilla shook a paper in the air, eyes pleading. Clarice turned toward the noise, brow furrowed. She took a step forward. But someone moved faster. From the far end of the hallway, Harrison Cole emerged. No mop, no cart, just quiet certainty. He stepped between the clamor like he was walking into a storm he already knew how to tame. Clarice blinked. The janitor? Without preamble, Harrison approached the Moroccan father first. In fluent Arabic, he said, "Peace be upon you. Please, tell me exactly what happened." The man's face changed instantly. His shoulders dropped with relief. He spoke rapidly, gesturing to the denial letter. Harrison nodded, eyes scanning the document. Then, in French, he turned to the Congolese mother. "Madame, don't worry. I'll review the entire form with you. No one will be left behind." Then, Swahili. Clarice's breath caught in her throat. The final family, whose child had started coughing from stress, lit up as Harrison knelt to speak with them gently, reassuringly, like he had done this every day of his life. No stammer, no hesitation, just command. Within minutes, the chaos had dissolved into quiet conversation. Harrison moved between tables like a conductor, asking questions, explaining regulations, highlighting misprints, and misplaced stamps. Mia whispered, stunned, "He's correcting USCIS forms in 3 languages. Clarice didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her eyes were fixed on Harrison, on the man she had mocked not long ago as the cleaning guy. He wasn't looking for recognition. He wasn't performing. He was solving. She watched as one of the Congolese children took his hand and pointed shyly to the American flag patch sewn into Harrison's worn backpack. "Are you a soldier?" the boy asked. Harrison paused. His gaze drifted just slightly. Then he smiled, kneeling to the boy's level. "I was," he said softly. "Now, I just help people in different battles." Clarice took a step back, heart thudding. She didn't recognize this version of herself, the one who suddenly felt small in the presence of quiet greatness. Who is this man? Really, she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Mia answered anyway. The janitor, with 9 languages, a military gate, and every refugee here treating him like a lifeline. Clarice nodded slowly. Mia leaned in. He's what you call a man worth knowing. The families were now laughing, gathered in small circles, as Harrison handed out corrected packets with fresh stamps and polite instructions. Clarice approached carefully, not wanting to disturb the scene, but needing to be part of it. "Mr. Cole," she began. He turned. Calm as always. She cleared her throat. "That was impressive." He gave a modest nod. "They just needed to be heard in their own language, that's all." Clarice hesitated. "You didn't have to step in, but you did." "I don't wait for permission to do the right thing." It wasn't defiant. It was simply truth. Clarice studied him. He stood tall, not in posture, but in presence. The room bent around his gravity, not out of charisma, but quiet authority. "I misjudged you," she admitted. "I'm used to that. But I'd like to change it." He raised an eyebrow. She continued, more carefully this time. "Would you consider consulting with our team? We're building a cross-cultural strategy. Someone like you, your insight, it could change things." Harrison looked down thoughtfully. "I clean floors," he said finally, "but I also build bridges." A small smile tugged at Clarice's lips. "Maybe it's time we let you do both." That evening, as the sun set over the city, Clarice sat alone in her car, still parked outside the outreach center. She watched Harrison through the window. He was helping an elderly Vietnamese woman down the stairs, holding her bag, speaking to her in soft, careful tones. She beamed up at him like he was her own son. Clarice exhaled. Power was never meant to sit behind glass walls or be flaunted in golden shoes. Sometimes it wore a janitor's apron and spoke 9 languages no one had cared to hear. Until now, the soft click of high heels echoed through the empty hallway of the Montalban Foundation's private offices. It was nearly midnight, and the only light came from a floor lamp beside Clarice's desk. Everything else was dark. Shadows fell long and quiet across the marble floor. The silence felt earned, almost sacred. Clarice Montalban sat alone. Her laptop glowed with the pale light of classified databases, bypassed through executive clearance. Her fingers hovered over the keys, not with hesitation, but reverence. She wasn't a woman who often second-guessed herself, but this felt different. She searched one name: Harrison James Cole. There was no picture, just a file number and a rank. U.S. Army Intelligence Support Activity. Language Operations Specialist. Her breath caught. Then came the commendations, buried in brief but haunting citations. For valorous conduct in Operation Silent Bridge, Baghdad, 2003. Single-handedly neutralized a civilian hostage scenario using multilingual negotiation tactics in Pashto, Arabic, and Dari. Saved the life of Lieutenant Aaron Whitfield, son of Brigadier General C.R. Whitfield, under active fire. Her finger traced the screen as if she could touch the past. She remembered General Whitfield, one of the powerhouses in defense contracting circles. He sat on multiple advisory boards, a man who held levers that moved entire regions. His son. That would have made headlines. But there was no headline, no recognition, no medal ceremony. Just a note in red at the bottom of the file. Discharged, non-voluntary, classified reassigned to civilian life. Reason: refusal to comply with Directive 47X. Clarice's eyes narrowed. She dug deeper. Another document, heavily redacted, surfaced. It took time and unauthorized credentials, but she was the CEO of one of the largest humanitarian logistics firms in the country. She had access. Power had its privileges. She read the report twice, then a third time, and the silence in her office began to feel suffocating. Operation Silent Bridge was never meant to be public. It involved a rogue supply chain move, disguised as humanitarian aid, masking weapons distribution across tribal lines. Harrison, fluent in the local dialects, had uncovered it mid-mission. His report contradicted his superior's orders. He refused to play along. He was offered silence, in exchange for a medal, a promotion, and a consulting role in Washington. He chose discharge. He chose obscurity. He chose truth. Clarice leaned back in her chair, staring at the wall. For once, the glass windows of her empire didn't reflect confidence or control. Just a woman facing a version of decency she couldn't compete with. The next morning, she found herself in front of Harrison's janitor locker, unsure what to say, unsure how to speak for once. He was bent over, fixing a leaky pipe beneath the utility sink, sleeves rolled up, sweat beading on his temple. When he saw her shoes, those unmistakable heels, he stood, wiping his hands with a rag. "Ms. Montalban," he said simply. "Do you have a minute?" she asked, quieter than usual. He studied her face, then nodded, stepping aside. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she handed him a folded piece of paper. He opened it, and his eyes, for a moment, hardened. "You accessed my file." "I did." There was no defensiveness in her tone, no justification, only gravity. "You weren't just a soldier," she said softly. "You were a man who chose integrity over power. You saved lives, and you were erased for it." Harrison looked at her, long and unreadable, then folded the paper again and tucked it into his back pocket. "I didn't need anyone to know," he replied. Clarice's voice cracked. "But I needed to know. I needed to understand why you walk the way you do, why you never raise your voice, why every word you speak is weighted like stone." She swallowed. "You carry wounds the world never thanked you for." Harrison turned away, pretending to organize tools on a shelf that didn't need organizing. His hands trembled slightly. "I was just doing what was right," he said. "But the world called it wrong." He said nothing. She stepped closer. "They tried to bury you, but you became a gardener." That made him turn, his brow lifted in surprise. "Every child you help, every woman you speak up for, every language you lend your voice to, you plant something in people the system forgot to water." Silence stretched between them, a silence that pulsed with understanding. Harrison exhaled. "Why are you telling me this?" Clarice hesitated, then said, "Because I'm tired of building empires that leave good men invisible." Her voice softened. "And because I think I was wrong about everything." Harrison leaned back against the locker, folding his arms. "You weren't wrong about everything, just about the kind of people who mop your floor." That earned a smile, a small one, but real. "I want to fix this," Clarice said. "Not just your file, the way we operate, the way we listen, or don't." He studied her for a long time, then nodded slowly. "Then start by listening to the ones no one else hears." That night, Clarice stared out over the city from her penthouse balcony, glass of untouched wine in hand. She didn't see buildings anymore. She saw faces. The Syrian father's fear, the Congolese mother's hope, the Vietnamese grandmother's trembling hand, Lily's brilliant, fearless eyes, and Harrison, standing in all of it, silent, steadfast, unmoved by power, but moved by pain. She whispered to herself, as if trying on a truth that felt foreign. "Maybe heroes don't wear medals." She looked up. They wear mops and kindness and scars they never speak of. It wasn't an email. It wasn't a summons. It was a handwritten note, tucked under the mop bucket in the janitor's closet, folded neatly in thick paper, bearing the watermark of the Montalban Foundation. The handwriting was elegant, deliberate, hers. "Lunch, tomorrow, 1 o'clock, 17th floor terrace. Bring Lily. Clarice Montalban." Harrison stared at it for a moment, then looked up at the ceiling, as if expecting cameras or traps or tricks. But all he heard was the low hiss of a pipe and the rhythmic tap of a leaky faucet. He folded the note and slid it into his shirt pocket. He said nothing, just resumed mopping. The next day, the elevator ride was quiet. Lily stood beside her father, clutching a canvas tote bag that jingled faintly with the sound of language cards and colored pencils. She looked up at him and whispered, "Do rich people eat different sandwiches?" Harrison chuckled softly. "Only the ones that forget what hunger feels like." The elevator dinged. Doors opened to a sun-drenched rooftop terrace draped in white linens and warm ocean breeze. Glass railings framed the skyline of downtown Los Angeles. A round table sat near the edge, shaded by a cream umbrella. At the center, Clarice sat alone, sipping water from a crystal glass. She rose. Harrison hesitated, His boots felt loud against the pristine tile. His janitor uniform, though clean, stood in harsh contrast to the elegance of the space. But Lily walked forward without hesitation, her hair in 2 playful braids, her smile unshaken by altitude or power. "Hi, Miss Clarice," she chirped, extending a hand. Clarice blinked, then bent down to shake it, startled by the child's natural grace. "Please," Clarice said, gesturing to the chairs. "Sit." They did. For a long moment, the only sound was the clink of silverware as servers arrived. 3 plates of warm bread, grilled vegetables, and lemon-roasted chicken. Everything was arranged with absurd perfection. "I'm not used to being served like this," Harrison murmured. Clarice looked at him, then gently replied, "Neither am I." He met her eyes. Something had softened. Midway through the meal, Lily reached into her tote and pulled out a stack of flashcards, laying them on the table like trading cards. "Do you know what this says?" she asked Clarice, holding up a card with elegant loops of Arabic script. Clarice squinted, clearly out of her depth. "Salam," Lily said. "It means peace." Clarice smiled faintly. "That's beautiful. My dad taught me. He taught me lots of things, even how to talk to prisoners." The air froze for just a moment. Clarice glanced up. Harrison's fork paused in midair. His jaw tightened, then relaxed. Lily, unaware of the sudden stillness, continued with all the honesty of an 8-year-old. "When I was little, he used to teach language to people in uniform. Some had medals, some had handcuffs. He never told me which ones were which." Clarice's hand hovered over her wine glass. Slowly, she set it down. She looked at Harrison, not with scrutiny, but with weight, as if everything Lily had said added gravity to the man sitting across from her. "You taught prisoners?" she asked quietly. "I taught humans," Harrison replied, calm but firm. Clarice looked down, then nodded. They sat in silence for a moment, the kind of silence that says more than small talk ever could. Lily broke it, as always. "Miss Clarice, do you speak other languages?" "A few," she answered, "but only enough to embarrass myself in airports." Lily giggled. "That's okay. Airports need humility." Clarice looked at the child, this small, bright spark sitting across from her, and smiled. It wasn't the rehearsed smile of a CEO. It was smaller, realer. "I think you're right," she said softly. After dessert, mini lemon tarts served with lavender tea, Clarice stood up and turned to Harrison. "I invited you both here," she began, "because I owed you more than a file. I needed to see who you were, not just what you did." "And did you?" he asked. She looked at him, truly looked. "I think I'm just beginning to." Her voice shifted. "You know, this company, my legacy, was built on logistics, precision, power. But lately, it's felt hollow, like I've been speaking the wrong language all along." Harrison's gaze didn't flinch. Clarice continued. "And then your daughter translated a letter for me that I couldn't read. And I realized I hadn't just lost fluency. I'd lost humanity." She took a breath, then reached into her pocket and slid something across the table. It was a visitor's badge, gold-trimmed, with Harrison's name printed in bold. "Full clearance," she said. "No mop required." He stared at it, then pushed it back. "I'm not ashamed of the mop," he said. Clarice didn't move, didn't protest. She just nodded. "I know," she said. "But maybe, just maybe, the world needs your voice more than your broom." He didn't answer, but something in his expression changed, just slightly, a flicker of something unspoken, not acceptance, not refusal, but consideration. Later, as they rode the elevator down, Lily leaned against her father's side, content. "She's not as scary as I thought," she said, yawning. "No," Harrison murmured, "just scared of the wrong things." That night, Clarice sat alone on her terrace again, replaying Lily's voice in her mind. The words, the innocence, the quiet dignity of a man who had no title, yet carried the weight of generations in his silence. And for the first time in a very long time, Clarice Montalban did not feel alone in her own empire. The ballroom shimmered under soft chandeliers, no harsh spotlights, no overproduced theatrics, just candlelit warmth, string quartet notes floating like whispers, and a podium that bore no nameplate. Clarice had insisted. "This night isn't about brands or power," she'd said. "It's about voices we forgot to listen to." And so, the invitation simply read, "An evening for silent heroes." The city's elite had gathered, corporate giants, dignitaries, philanthropists, but there was an unusual hush in the room, as if the crowd sensed this gala was different. The silence wasn't stiff, it was reverent. Harrison stood near the back, wearing a borrowed suit that didn't quite hide his calloused hands, or the old scar on his temple. Lily stood beside him, her dark blue dress twirling slightly every time she shifted her weight. Her hair had been done by one of Clarice's stylists, but she still insisted on wearing her worn sneakers beneath the dress. "Just in case I need to run," she'd whispered with a wink. Clarice appeared on stage, elegant in a black satin gown that glistened like starlight, but her eyes weren't rehearsed. Tonight they were searching. Unmasked, she stepped to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice steady but softened by humility. "We gather tonight, not to admire the loud, but to listen to the quiet. The janitors, the translators, the single parents, the overlooked, the overqualified, the ones who swept the floor while carrying the weight of the world in their hearts." A pause. "And tonight, I'd like to invite someone very special to the stage." Heads turned. Clarice's gaze found Harrison. The room followed it. He didn't move at first. Then Lily gave his hand a tug. "Go on, Daddy," she said. "They need to see." He made his way to the stage, the room parting like gentle tide. No applause, just stillness. He reached the podium, adjusted the microphone, then looked out at the sea of faces. He cleared his throat. "I was asked to accept this," he said, glancing at the plaque Clarice held. "But I didn't come here to be honored." Whispers stirred. He turned to Lily. "Sweetheart," he said, "would you mind?" She blinked, then nodded. Harrison stepped aside. The little girl stepped up to the mic, alone, barely tall enough. Clarice bent to adjust the stand, then stepped back. Lily took a breath and began. "My name is Lily Cole. I am 8 years old. I don't have a degree. I don't have money. But I have something my mother gave me before she died. A letter." She reached into her dress pocket and pulled out a folded, time-worn page. "It's written in a language most people don't read anymore. Old Spanish, the kind they speak in villages that don't have clean water. My father taught me how to read it. And tonight, I want you to hear it. All of it." She read slowly. The words, foreign to most ears, wove a tale of sacrifice, hunger, and hope. A mother begging for mercy in a country that saw her as a number, not a soul. Her voice trembled on certain syllables, but she never paused. Her eyes stayed forward, proud. When she finished, she looked up. "This is not just my mother's story," she said. "It's every family who was silenced because they didn't speak the right language." Then Lily lifted her chin. "So tonight, I speak for them." And one by one, softly, deliberately, she spoke. For the mother in Aleppo, Salam. For the child in Nairobi, Amani. For the boy in Shanghai, Heping. For the grandmother in Hanoi, Hoa Binh. For the girl in Kiev, Mir. For the family in Tijuana, Paz. For the protester in Tehran, Sol. For the student in Paris, Pi. For the refugee in Berlin, Frieden. Each word was followed by silence, not applause. Silence, because the room couldn't breathe. Tears shimmered in eyes that hadn't blinked in minutes. People clutched their wine glasses not out of etiquette, but because their hands were trembling. For many, it was the first time they'd heard peace spoken in a language not their own, and understood it anyway. Then, quietly, Clarice stood. She clapped. Once, twice, 3 times. The room followed. The applause swelled, not like a wave, but like a sunrise. Slow, inevitable, warming everything it touched. Clarice approached the podium and knelt to Lily's level. "Thank you," she said, her voice cracking. "You didn't just speak 9 languages, you translated our silence." Harrison stepped forward. Clarice looked up at him, not with pity, not with awe, but with respect. "You said you weren't here to be honored," she said. He nodded. "But tonight, you honored all of us." He smiled, just a little, then whispered, "She gets it from her mother." That night, as the guests filed out into the cool Los Angeles evening, the talk wasn't of profits or power. It was of a girl who didn't need a microphone to be heard, of a man who never needed a title to lead, and of a room full of people who, for once, truly listened. The boardroom was all glass, marble, and money, the kind of space where ethics often got filtered through profit margins, where polished shoes mattered more than calloused hands, where language, unless it was the language of capital, rarely held weight. Clarice sat at the head of the table. Her signature red folder was closed, untouched. Her face was poised, but the slight twitch in her jaw betrayed the war beneath her skin. The 12 members of the Montalban Foundation Board sat in a crescent around her. Men and women, sharp in tailored suits, eyes fixed, polite but predatory. Gerald Voss, the CFO, spoke first, predictably. "We've reviewed the budget breakdown for Q4, he began, flipping through a stack of spreadsheets with surgical precision. The multilingual community initiatives account for nearly 17% of philanthropic expenditures, yet produce 0 ROI. A few nods followed. One cleared her throat, another sipped her mineral water. Clarice didn't blink. Gerald went on. "With all due respect, Clarice, this is a foundation, not a fantasy. We're here to help, yes, but strategically, not emotionally." Another board member added, "Language services are noble, but they're not scalable. We propose downsizing the program, maybe keep English-Spanish at the border, but scrap the rest." Clarice finally looked up. "And what happens to the Vietnamese grandmothers, the Somali teenagers, the Ukrainian widows?" Gerald offered a flat smile. "We can't save everyone." The room was quiet, that kind of quiet that follows the sound of something sacred being stepped on. Clarice sat back. The light caught the gold pendant around her neck, an heirloom from her own immigrant mother. For a moment, her fingers touched it, then dropped. Before she could speak, the door creaked open, and Harrison Cole stepped in. No one had called him. He wasn't on the invite list, but he walked in like he belonged there. And somehow, no one stopped him. Clarice didn't move. Harrison didn't ask for permission. He simply approached the long table, set down a stack of manila folders, one by one, in front of each board member. "What's this?" Gerald asked, frowning. Harrison didn't answer. He turned to leave. Clarice spoke gently. "Mr. Cole." He paused. "You may as well stay." A moment later, chairs creaked as folders opened. Inside, each one contained pages printed in multiple languages: Arabic, Swahili, Mandarin, Russian, French. At first, the text meant little to the executives, until they saw the English translations below. Each page was a direct quote, translated from families who'd been denied service, delayed at clinics, misdiagnosed, or misinformed, because their language didn't make the budget. They gave me medicine for my husband. He died because I couldn't explain it wasn't me who was sick. Translated from Farsi. I thought she was yelling at me, but the nurse was just asking if I was cold. Translated from Dari. We waited 7 hours. Then they told us they couldn't help because no one spoke Somali. My daughter cried herself to sleep in my lap. No dramatics, just words. Raw, undeniable. Clarice stood slowly. Every quote you're reading, she said softly, was pulled from 1 week, just one, at one of our funded centers. These aren't statistics. They're stories. People. A man across the table, a usually stoic investor, cleared his throat and pushed his folder away, eyes misting. Harrison finally spoke. I've cleaned the floors of your buildings, he said, voice calm but cutting. Translated for the people you forgot. I never asked to sit at this table, but I've been listening. He pointed at the documents. So have they. Silence again. But it wasn't comfortable. It was convicting. One of the younger board members spoke, almost whispering. Why didn't we know? Clarice answered, because language isn't just communication. It's visibility, and we've chosen not to see. Voss shuffled his papers, discomfort rising. Even so, this isn't a sustainable model, Clarice interrupted. Then maybe we change the model? She looked at Harrison. He nodded once. The moment hung. Then, one by one, hands reached for pens. Amendments were drafted, motions retracted. The initiative wasn't just saved, it was expanded. A new resolution was added. Every center must be staffed with cultural and linguistic liaisons, trained and protected. A standing ovation of silent signatures. When the final vote passed unanimously, Clarice looked across the room, not as a CEO, but as a woman who had remembered her own forgotten voice. As the room emptied, she walked toward Harrison. I didn't know you were coming, she said. I didn't plan to, he replied. She looked down at the leftover folders. They listened. They heard? Harrison corrected. That's different. Clarice nodded slowly. Then, without a trace of performance, she extended her hand. Thank you, she said. He looked at her hand, then gently shook it. For Lily, he said simply. And for her mother. Clarice's eyes welled, but she said nothing. Some truths didn't need translation. And in that boardroom, where money usually spoke first and loudest, it was a janitor's silence that won the war. The night air shimmered with the quiet residue of applause. The gala had ended, but its echoes still hung in the city like breath on glass. The marble steps of the Montalban Foundation gleamed slick under the rain, now soft and steady, more a whisper than a storm. Clarice stood at the top of the steps, clutching her shawl around her shoulders. Her hair, so often meticulously styled, was now damp, loose strands curling against her cheek. But she didn't seem to care. Not tonight. Down the steps, Lily ran ahead, her arms stretched out like airplane wings, spinning and laughing in the mist. Her laughter wasn't loud, but it cut through the silence like a hymn in a cathedral. Behind her, Harrison walked beside Clarice. His jacket was soaked through, but he walked with the same calm steadiness as always, a quiet anchor in the storm. They didn't speak for a long time, just the sound of raindrops, and Lily's joy. They walked slowly, side by side, toward the main gate. The street lamps glowed golden against the gray haze, casting their shadows long and uncertain on the pavement. Clarice finally broke the silence. Her voice was soft, almost shy. You changed the way I see dignity. Harrison turned his head slightly, his face unreadable beneath the rain, but his eyes, always his eyes, held a kindness that went deeper than words. You changed the way I see forgiveness. Clarice blinked, not because of the rain, but because she hadn't expected that. They kept walking. Behind them, the foundation loomed, a fortress of privilege now slightly less impenetrable. Ahead, the city waited. Clarice exhaled, a sound caught between a sigh and a confession. I used to think helping people meant saving them, that if I gave enough, donated enough, built enough, I could prove I wasn't like the ones who looked down on my mother when we first arrived in this country. Harrison didn't respond immediately. He let her speak. Now I wonder, she continued, if I ever truly saw the people I was trying to save. He stopped at the edge of the sidewalk, water pooling around his boots. Clarice stopped too. He looked at her, not with judgment, but with that calm, surgical truthfulness he carried like a second skin. We all build walls, Clarice. Some of us just polish them with gold. She let out a short, bitter laugh. Guilty. He shook his head. No. Human. There's a difference. A car honked in the distance. Lily turned and ran back to them, rain dripping from her curls. Daddy, she said, holding up a worm wriggling in her tiny palm. He was on the sidewalk. I saved him. Clarice crouched instinctively, looking at the small creature. Lily smiled proudly. He looked like he was going to get squished, so I moved him to the grass. Clarice smiled, then reached out and gently brushed Lily's wet bangs from her forehead. You're a rescuer, she said softly. Lily beamed. Like my dad. Clarice stood slowly. The rain hadn't let up, but it didn't matter anymore. She turned to Harrison again. There was a flicker in her eyes, vulnerability, perhaps even admiration, but not the polished kind that lives behind podiums. This one was real, weathered, earned. I used to be afraid of people like you, she admitted. Like me? He asked, brow raised. People who didn't need the spotlight, she said. Who didn't crave validation. People who could hold truth without trying to control it. He chuckled. Well, I used to be afraid of people like you. She smirked. Let me guess. The ones with too much money and too little sense? No, he replied gently. The ones who stopped believing they were still redeemable. Clarice went quiet. That one landed somewhere deep. They reached the intersection. The streetlight blinked red. Harrison reached out and gently took Lily's hand. She squeezed it twice, once for love, once for safety. Clarice watched the way he held her, so effortlessly, so fully present. May I walk you both home? She asked, almost awkwardly. Harrison glanced down at Lily, who was busy jumping over puddles. Then he looked back at Clarice. You sure? He asked. The rain doesn't stop for CEOs. Clarice smiled, a real one this time, the kind that didn't need to impress anyone. Maybe that's the point. They crossed the street together, 3 shadows merging into one, and though no one watching would have noticed it, something shifted that night. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a small, irreversible tilt in the world's axis. A janitor, a CEO, a little girl who spoke 9 languages and saved worms in the rain. Together, walking towards something they didn't yet have words for. But maybe, just maybe, that was what made it worth discovering. The park was quiet. Autumn leaves, golden and brittle, floated down like soft confetti from the trees. The light was gentler now, filtered through branches half bare, half clinging to memory. A cool breeze whispered through the grass, carrying with it the scent of earth and old rain. Harrison crouched near a stone bench by the walking path, a small toolbox open beside him. Lily stood a few feet away, holding a polished brass plaque with both hands like it was made of glass. She wasn't smiling. She was reverent. The kind of quiet only children seem to understand when they know something matters. Harrison tapped in the final screw with slow, deliberate care. The plaque clicked softly into place. Then he leaned back, sitting on his heels, and let out a long breath. Finished. Lily stepped forward and ran her fingers across the engraved words. In every language, kindness means the same. The letters shimmered faintly in the morning sun, catching the light just enough to draw a second glance from anyone who passed by. Below the main inscription, in smaller script, were 9 names, each etched in a different language: Arabic, French, Vietnamese, Russian, Swahili, Japanese, Spanish, Pashto, English. 9 languages. 9 lives Harrison and Lily had touched since their quiet mission began, translating not just words, but pain and dignity and hope. Clarice had arranged for the bench to be officially registered with the city, but it was Lily's idea to call it the Bench of Names. Not the donors' names, not the foundations, but the names of those who had once been invisible, those now seen and remembered. A jogger slowed down near the bench, his breath visible in the chilly air. He read the plaque, then sat down for a moment, silently. He didn't check his phone, didn't speak, just sat and smiled. Across the path, Harrison stood and brushed the dust from his hands. Lily looked up at him. "Do you think people will remember them?" she asked softly. Harrison crouched beside her. "That's not the point, sweetheart. The point is, we remembered them, and we gave them something they didn't have before." "What's that?" she asked. He smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "A place in the story." She nodded, absorbing that with the gravity only an 8-year-old polyglot philosopher could muster. A breeze kicked up again, and Lily zipped her jacket higher. Clarice arrived a few minutes later, dressed casually, scarf, blazer, no heels. She carried a paper cup of coffee in one hand, a camera in the other. "I hope I'm not too late," she said. "You're just in time," Harrison replied. Clarice approached the bench and ran her fingers across the plaque. When she got to the final name, a tight breath escaped her lips. It was her mother's name, written in Old Castilian Spanish, the language of lullabies and unspoken sacrifices. She blinked fast, then smiled. "I brought something," she said, handing Lily the camera. "Would you take a photo of us?" Lily lit up. "Say cheese." Harrison and Clarice sat on the bench together. No one posed, no one forced a smile. They just looked ahead, at the path, at the trees, at the people slowly noticing the plaque. Lily snapped the picture, then another, then another. Just because. She sat beside them after that, the 3 of them on a single stone bench, not saying much, not needing to. A young mother pushing a stroller stopped to read the inscription. An elderly woman with a walking cane smiled and nodded before taking a seat nearby. One by one, people paused and noticed. Clarice leaned over to Harrison. "When I was a little girl," she whispered, "my mom used to say, 'You'll know you've healed when you start planting kindness in places that won't remember your name.'" He nodded slowly. "That's the only kind of kindness that matters." A moment passed, then another. Clarice turned to Lily. "Would you like to name our next project?" Lily tilted her head. "What is it?" Clarice smiled. "A scholarship fund for children of immigrants, multilingual, multicultural, just like you." Lily looked up at her father. He said nothing, just gave a slight nod. Lily grinned. "I want to call it the first word." Clarice raised an eyebrow. "Why that?" "Because," Lily said, kicking her legs, "every story starts with a first word, even the hard ones." Clarice's eyes softened. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. She handed it to Harrison. "It's something I've been holding on to for too long." Harrison opened it. Inside was an old photo. Harrison, 20 years younger, standing beside Clarice's father, the general in a desert outpost. They both looked battle-worn, but alive. On the back was scribbled, "To the man who saved my son, when bullets spoke louder than politics." Clarice looked away. I never knew he wrote that. I only found it last week. Harrison folded the photo carefully and tucked it into his coat pocket. His voice was low. Some things arrive when we're ready to carry them. Lily stood up and pointed at the sky. Look! 2 birds circled above them, dipping and gliding through the cool air, dancing like the breeze itself had a story to tell. Clarice looked up and whispered, "Maybe kindness is the only language they speak, too." Harrison smiled. "I think that's exactly right." The camera, forgotten for a while, kept blinking softly in Lily's hands. Click. Another photo. No titles. No filters. Just a bench, 3 people, and a sentence that translated across every border. In every language, kindness means the same. The studio lights were warm and quiet. A silence before story. Clarice Montalban adjusted the microphone clip to her collar. No stylist today. No executive assistants in tow. She wore a simple navy dress, her dark hair pinned back loosely, her heels traded in for quiet flats. The only jewelry she wore was a small gold bracelet, a child's handwriting etched along the edge. Gracias por mi voz. Thank you for my voice. The live talk show's host gave the cue. The cameras rolled. We're here with Clarice Montalban, the host began, smiling warmly. Once dubbed the Iron CEO, now the founder of something much more personal. Clarice, thank you for being here. Clarice smiled, a real one, soft around the eyes. Thank you for inviting me. You've made headlines again, the host said, gesturing to a screen behind them that displayed the bold headline, Montalban donates entire salary to language fund. Some people thought it was a PR stunt, the host said carefully. $1 million. No strings attached. Clarice turned slightly toward the camera. No strings, she said clearly. Just names, voices, children who deserve to be heard in the language of their hearts. She paused. Just like mine once wasn't. The host leaned forward, curious. You've called this your most important legacy. Why? Clarice smiled, but there was pain behind it. And peace. Because for most of my life, I thought power came from being understood. Now I know it comes from understanding others. She reached into her bag and took out a folded letter. The camera zoomed slightly. This is the letter my mother wrote in Old Spanish, the one I couldn't read, the one I dismissed as noise. She looked directly into the lens. A janitor read it to me. The audience stilled. Clarice's voice dropped, rich and clear. The man I laughed at is now the man I admire most. Behind the glass in the production room, Harrison stood quietly. He hadn't wanted to be on stage. He didn't like spotlights. But Clarice had asked him to be present, not for publicity, just for the truth. Beside him stood Lily in her best cardigan, her hands clasped politely. But her eyes sparkled. Her gaze never left the screen as her father's name was spoken with reverence. The host continued. You've named the new fund after him. Clarice nodded. The Harrison Cole Linguistic Fund. It will provide scholarships, legal aid translators, and multilingual education support to families across the country, especially immigrants and refugees. You've also declined your CEO salary this year. Clarice leaned back slightly. Actually, I've declined the next 3 years. A soft gasp from the audience. It's time that wealth spoke in more than profit margins. The camera cut briefly to the screen again. A new image appeared. A group of children from different nations holding signs in their native languages. Behind them, the familiar quote now carved on a park bench. In every language, kindness means the same. The host glanced down at his notes, then folded them away. Clarice, before we close, I have to ask, who is Harrison Cole, really? Clarice paused. She looked toward the production booth, found Harrison through the glass and smiled. Most people see a janitor. Some now call him a hero. But to me, she hesitated, just for a heartbeat. He's a mirror. The host blinked. A mirror? Clarice nodded. Yes. He reflected back the parts of myself I had buried, the parts I was afraid to translate. Grief, regret, compassion. He did what no boardroom ever taught me to do. She turned to the audience, her tone full of something that sounded like reverence. He taught me how to listen. Later that evening, long after the taping had ended, and the last crew member had packed up, Clarice walked alone through the park. The stone bench glowed softly under the golden city lights. She traced the plaque with her fingers again, the words now as familiar to her as her own name. A quiet cough behind her. Harrison. He held 2 paper cups of hot chocolate. Lily was already off, playing near the swings under a halo of streetlight. I watched the whole thing, Harrison said. Even the part where you called me a mirror. Clarice laughed. Too dramatic? No, he said, handing her the cup. Just accurate. They sat down in silence for a moment. Then she turned to him. I spent years trying to earn love by being the smartest person in the room, she whispered. You showed me that real dignity doesn't speak first. He chuckled softly. It usually waits, quietly. She looked up at him, tears beginning to well, not from pain this time, from release. I'm sorry, she said. For what? For not seeing you, for needing a spotlight before I could say 2 words that matter most. He tilted his head. Clarice breathed in, then out. Thank you. And she meant it. Every syllable, every language, every truth she had once been too proud to hear. It was the kind of autumn day that made the world pause. The park shimmered under a canopy of golden leaves. Trees stood like quiet witnesses, their branches letting go of the season in soft, rhythmic flutterings. Somewhere in the distance, a saxophone played slow jazz. The air smelled of cinnamon and earth, of endings and beginnings. 3 figures approached a marble statue at the center of the garden. Harrison, Clarice, Lily. The statue was new, its base still unweathered, the letters freshly carved. A simple form stood tall, a man in a janitor's apron, head bowed, holding a book in one hand and a mop in the other. But it wasn't the tools that caught the eye, it was the plaque beneath. To the interpreters of the invisible, who translate silence into hope and words into belonging. A single red maple leaf drifted down, landing on the polished stone. Lily stepped forward, her small hand brushing the base of the monument. She looked up, eyes filled with questions that only 8-year-olds dare ask out loud. Dad, she whispered, what's your favorite language? Harrison smiled, slowly kneeling beside her. The sun warmed his shoulders, casting long shadows behind him. He pulled her close, arms gentle and firm. The language of the heart, he said softly, pressing his forehead to hers. It speaks truth, without words. Lily smiled, as if she'd known the answer all along. Beside them, Clarice watched, silent, humbled, changed. She wasn't wearing designer heels or her usual tailored armor, just a gray wool coat, her hair loose, her eyes unshielded. She reached for Harrison's hand. He didn't flinch. He didn't speak. Their fingers intertwined naturally, like 2 vines that had grown in opposite directions, but found each other, twisting into a shared root. They stood like that for a while. No speeches, no reporters, no flashbulbs, just a man, a woman, and a child, bound by understanding far deeper than language. Clarice finally broke the silence. Do you think people will remember him? Harrison glanced at the statue, then at his daughter, who was now tracing the engraved words with her fingertip. They won't remember his name, he said, but they'll remember the feeling he gave them when someone finally heard them. Clarice nodded, her throat tight. That's enough. They sat down on a nearby bench, the one Lily had helped design. Etched into the backrest, in 9 different languages, were the same 5 words. Kindness is never lost in translation. Children played nearby. An old couple walked past and stopped to read the inscription. The man smiled. The woman pressed a hand to her chest. Neither said a word. Harrison closed his eyes. He remembered all of it. The war, the pain, the choices, the broom in his hand, the medals hidden in his drawer, the night spent teaching Lily how to greet the world in 9 different tongues, the mornings she whispered buongiorno before he'd even opened his eyes. He opened them again and saw something new. Clarice, laughing gently at something Lily said, the wind lifting a few leaves into the air like confetti, a group of teenagers arguing joyfully in 3 different accents. No more boardrooms, no more mop closets, no more silence imposed by power or pride, just life, in all its chaotic, multilingual, imperfect grace. Clarice leaned her head on Harrison's shoulder. I thought I had to build towers to matter, she murmured. Turns out I just had to listen, he chuckled. And I thought I had to disappear to stay safe. She looked up at him. You didn't disappear. You became a foundation. He blinked, and for once, didn't argue. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in strokes of fire and lavender. Lily ran toward the fountain nearby, calling out to a boy in Korean, then laughing as he replied in Arabic. They splashed water. They made no sense. They made perfect sense. Clarice exhaled deeply. Do you ever wonder what your life might have been if it had gone differently? Harrison stared at Lily, then at the monument. No, he said, because this, he gestured to the park, the people, the bench. This is the life I was meant to live. Clarice smiled through sudden tears. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. Some languages live between gestures. Some truths don't require punctuation. Harrison looked at Clarice, and she looked back, with an understanding that crossed every border. The kind of look you don't translate, the kind you simply speak. Where are you watching from today? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if this story touched your heart, even just a little, let us know how it made you feel. If you haven't already, we invite you to subscribe and join our growing community, where every story is a quiet reminder of the strength we carry, the kindness we sometimes forget, and the hope that still lives in all of us. Thank you for spending your time with us. Until next time, take care and stay kind.